Good afternoon, and welcome to the First Friday Club. My name is Father John Cusick, and I've been hanging out with this First Friday Club since we got it off the ground way back in 1986. And thank you for sharing your time with us today. Each day it gets a little closer to summer, and that makes me a very, very happy camper. Today we want to focus on an issue like so many issues that have been brought to our consciousness because of COVID. And that is the American worker. And we can even narrow it down a little bit to Chicago worker. We've seen a lot of change in the workforce. We've seen some concentrations of efforts. We've seen some analysis of the workplace and the workforce. And I think we really have a responsibility, a moral responsibility towards those who work. And so that's what we're going to focus on today on the First Friday Club. And to introduce our speaker today, I'm going to pass the baton to Mike Cahill and his wife, Kathy O'Connell Cahill, and we're going to take it from there. So it's all yours, Mike and Kath.
Thanks, Father Cusick. Welcome, everybody, and thank you, C.J. Hawking, for being with us today. C.J. is going to talk about Chicago's working people. What did we learn in the pandemic, and how will the faith community respond? And before she starts her presentation, Kathy will introduce C.J. a little bit more formally.
Reverend C.J. Hawking has served as Arise Chicago's executive director for 15 years. She's been in ministry for 38 years, with the last 28 being dedicated to organizing with low-wage workers and linking the faith community with workers' rights. In her first 10 years of ministry, she pastored churches in city, suburban, and rural settings, and served as a chaplain to people with AIDS. Hawking is co-author of the book Staley, The Fight for a New American Labor Movement, which won 3 Book of the Year awards. She has been a visiting lecturer on labor and social movements at Indiana University and the University of Illinois. She is the Harry F. Ward pastor at Euclid Avenue United Methodist Church in Oak Park, and is the proud mother of 2 daughters. The First Friday Club welcomes you, CJ.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Father John and Mike. It is really good to be with you, and God be with all of us in this hour. I'd like everyone to start by taking a deep breath in and feel that sacred presence within you, as this is the month where we mark the 2-year anniversary of the start of the pandemic. Let us pause for a moment to remember the lives of almost 6 million people who have died, many of whom contracted COVID in the workplace. Amen. I'd like to start today by talking about scripture and to point to Exodus 3, where we have Moses out in the field as a shepherd. As a matter of fact, he was helping his father-in-law, Jethro. It was actually Jethro's sheep, and Moses, the good son-in-law, goes out to help gather the sheep in. And while Moses is out doing that, he encounters a burning bush. And in this moment, well, first of all, Moses makes about 5 excuses to God why he isn't going to be the one to speak to the people. But God doesn't have any of that and keeps on pressing on Moses. And eventually God says to Moses, I want you to take my people out of those oppressive working conditions. And I believe that in this very moment, we forever linked faith and work together. People of faith are called to care about workers, and what happens in the workplace matters. There is a heightened awareness in the pandemic about the workplace. Many of us have started to consider who makes our lives work. Of course, there's the medical staff and first responders, and they've just been phenomenal in the 2 years of the pandemic. But also, as I talk with people, I think a lot of people are starting to consider who makes my life work so that I can stay at home, safe and comfortable? Who's making my life possible to make sure that I can eat? I believe more people are giving consideration to farm workers and food processing workers, truck drivers and warehouse workers, grocery store workers, delivery workers, all the people who make it possible for the rest of us to be safe and comfortable. But what has happened to these workers in the pandemic, most of whom are people of color, most of whom live in multi-generational households, and most of whom do not have any generational wealth or savings to fall back on, which push them out into the workplace? These workers have seen a death rate 2 and 3 times higher as people of color due to high-risk jobs and low consideration for their health and their well-being. So in this moment of the pandemic, I believe people are thinking more about how did this system get set up and how is it that we got to this place of enormous income inequality? Because we know that a wage also determines where a worker is going to live, what kind of medical care they're going to get in their life, what kind of life expectancy they can have, what kind of school their kids are going to go to. My church is in Oak Park, and the average life expectancy for someone in Oak Park River Forest is 83 years. Just a few blocks from here across the border in Austin, it's 72 years, an 11-year difference. So I want to ask today, what has happened to the American worker? I want to do this by doing a very quick run through of history, focusing on 1935 and 1955. In 1935, of course, the Depression is going on, and President Roosevelt passes the Fair Labor Standards Act. And this is where we as a country decided we're not going to accept childhood labor. We are going to establish Social Security and a minimum wage and workers' rights to join a union. It's clear that our values at the time is that the common good matters. We were beginning to make a social contract with each other, and we began to make laws about the workplace. We also began to make laws that we're going to care for our elderly, and we're also going to make the workplace safe and where workers can negotiate contracts. We had social solidarity with each other. So of course, we then go into World War II, and I want to move us all the way to 1955 as we're coming out of World War II. The GI Bill is in place. Veterans are getting home loans, college tuition, medical care, unemployment benefits. Again, we're worried about the common good. Most importantly, in 1955, 1 in 3 workers were in a union. We also see at this time part of the Great Migration, bringing African-American workers now into steel mills and factories. And so now African-Americans and whites are getting the same wages when they're unionized. We add into this social contract in the 1960s when President Johnson adds in Medicare and Medicaid. Again, we have shared values at this time in the life of our country. We have a shared prosperity. We're establishing the middle class. We're stabilizing society. I, of course, want to acknowledge there was still great disparity between African Americans and whites, as African Americans were pushed out of housing opportunities and good schools. And of course, there was a great disparity for women as well. But I do want to look at what has happened to our country through the lens of the American worker. So coming out of 1955, when 1 in 3 workers is in a union, we now fast forward to the 1980s, where union busting becomes a thing. It is now a $19 billion industry each year. Also in the 1980s, we see deregulation, deindustrialization. And so for the past 40 years of our country, the government has been passing policies that favor the wealthy. Billionaires have doubled during this time, but we've seen a hollowing out of the middle class. And certainly those who are at the bottom rung have lower wages, no health care, and live in high crime areas with broken school systems. Friends, we have lost our way to the common good. Our society ties with each other have been frayed, and individualism is out of control. Greed is out of control. Before I bring it back today and talking about essential workers in the pandemic, I want to hop back just a minute to 1935. One way that President Roosevelt was able to pass the Fair Labor Standards Act was to get the Southern Democrats on board, but they insisted that out of workers' rights covered by the National Labor Relations Board, the Southern Democrats insisted we need to eliminate farm workers, Latino workers, and domestic workers, mostly African-American workers. So we pass these laws and it covers the majority of workers, but these two groups are left out. If you ever needed evidence that our country has racist laws, this is a huge one. So along with allies, for 5 years, Arise Chicago fought for the Illinois Domestic Worker Bill of Rights, and it was passed in 2016. And it brought in some domestic worker rights, not all of the rights. As a matter of fact, they still had a sub-minimum wage and didn't exactly get overtime. But then we look in 2021 at what the city of Chicago did, and it was very exciting. In August of 2021, domestic workers' sub-minimum wage was eliminated. And now domestic workers are at the same minimum wage as all the other workers in the city of Chicago, which is $15 an hour. And then the city of Chicago, this is at the city council meeting in June 2021, passed another ordinance that's very exciting and historical. They decided that if you employ a domestic worker, this is someone who comes in and provides care for the elderly or disabled, is a nanny, or even those who come in and clean your house. They decided that the employer of domestic workers need to provide a contract detailing the rights of domestic workers, their hours worked, their wages, their actual job description as well. Again, this is historical, and I congratulate the city of Chicago on passing this ordinance. Our society sends a very consistent message that people only care about themselves, that we should consume as much as we can to help the GDP. People internalize these values, and then they confuse happiness with satisfying appetites of consumerism. And here we are. As the faith community, I believe we have a call to leverage our collective voice and to make sure that there is a counter voice to that message of individualism. As the faith community, I believe that we have a call to ignite once again that social solidarity with one another, to work together for the common good, because when one suffers, we all suffer. I believe we are called right in this moment to advocate and work in the best interest of the bottom 50% of income earners and not the top 1%. Let us work together, my dear friends, my brothers and sisters, for the common good. Amen.
Thank you, CJ. That was great. Can you tell us what are some of the actual problems out there that low-wage workers in Chicago are facing on a daily basis?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So let's even look before the pandemic. In 2009, UIC did a study, And it looked at wage theft in Cook County. This is a very reputable study done by highly regarded professors. What they found is that in a given day in Cook County, $1 million is stolen from low-wage workers, mostly immigrant workers. Those wages are stolen by not paying workers proper minimum wage, not paying them proper overtime, forcing them to work off the clock. Arise Chicago has identified 24 different ways in which employers steal wages from workers, and it's rampant. $1 million a day. In the 2 decades that Arise has been working to help workers recover wages as well as building up their own leadership skills, Arise has recovered $9 million. We're very, very proud of this, but it's barely over a week's of stolen wages. In the pandemic, when the pandemic broke out, we heard this thing about essential workers. Of course, we needed medical care and we needed first responders. But I'm also pausing to ask, who exactly were essential workers and who made that decision? I'm going to use a food processing plant in Bedford Park as an example. They had a COVID outbreak, I believe it was April or May of 2020, and workers took it upon themselves to leave the plant and go in quarantine for the 2 weeks that the CDC at that time was recommending. About half of the workforce, about 60 out of the 120, left the job, signed a piece of paper to protect them, according to the National Labor Relations Board, and went in quarantine for 2 weeks. One worker said to us, you know, I care for my parents. They don't even go out. I do all the grocery shopping. I do get their meds for them, et cetera. And he said, I'm not going to leave the workplace because they didn't have wages during this time. Workers were going out and then going to suffer the economic impact, but at least they would have their lives. This particular worker called us about a week later after the workers had left the workplace, and he told us, my father just died. Unbeknownst to him, he was asymptomatic, he had COVID, and he gave it to his father. He called us a week after that, and his mother died. This man's life is forever changed. We should not have had him working. We should have had testing. We should have asked ourselves, because at this plant they made Jell-O pudding and flan. We should have asked ourselves, are Jell-O pudding and flan actually essential to us right now in the pandemic? I really do question how we as a society decided what was essential and what was not, again, beyond the first responders, et cetera. So Arise Chicago works with low-wage workers, and they have always been vulnerable. In the pandemic, their very lives were at risk. We average 25 to 50 phone calls a week. In the pandemic, it ticked up to 160 phone calls a week. Workers were struggling for their lives because employers were discounting their lives and not giving them personal protection equipment and social distancing. And I get that. A lot of these plants were not made for workers to be 6 feet apart. I totally get that. But there should have been some accommodation for worker safety.
Just to follow up too, I've seen in the paper coverage of Arise's work with Portillo's and also El Milagro, that the workers there have been getting help from you to bring their conditions out to the public.
Yeah. Let's start with El Milagro, which many of you know is a favorite tortilla in the city of Chicago, probably the best in our area. This is a tortilla plant that has 4 different locations, mostly in the Pilsen neighborhood. And the 4 different plants are about a mile and a half from each other. They total about 400 workers at these 4 plants. In May or June, I believe it was, in 2020, 85 workers were COVID positive, 85 workers. And it took pressure from the workers in order for management to respond and make conditions change. Tragically, out of those 85 workers, 5 of them died. I met the son of one of them. He has a 2-year-old baby, and his father will never be able to see that child grow up. The grief among low-wage workers is immense. The grief among workers who died alone in the hospital because no one could come and see them, or whose relatives died in the hospital and they couldn't go and see them. This is an enormous burden that workers carry. So you asked about Portillo's as well. So we saw a lot of outbreaks in 2020. By the beginning of 2021, of course, there's vaccines, and Arise Chicago had vaccine days for our worker members and really encouraged everyone to get vaccinated. But what started happening is that a lot of workers across the country still didn't feel safe, or didn't have childcare, or didn't have conditions where they could return to work. So what was happening at the Portillo's production plant up in Addison was that their workload doubled because there weren't enough workers to do the production. That also happened at El Milagro, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Up at Portillo's in Addison, workers, 19 of the 25 workers, walked off the job because they felt that the production levels were so focused on speed up that their production levels were inhumane. They left the job for over a week, a health strike, as we call it. When they returned, they received a $2 an hour raise, which is exactly what they needed. And the company hired more workers. Had the workers not taken action on their own, the company would have just kept going as they were. Going back to El Milagro, so those 5 deaths happened in 2020, and by summer of 2021, the workers at El Milagro are experiencing the same thing around speed up. For instance, one worker told us that he would have to bag 60 packages of tortillas in 1 minute. 60 in 1 minute. That's 1 a second that you're wrapping the plastic around. I don't know fully how it all works. 60 in 1 minute. And then because there was a shortage of workers, he then had to bag 80 in 1 minute. It was physically impossible. So these are the kind of working conditions that workers are objecting to. In addition, when El Milagro was bringing on new workers, they were paying them $2 and $3 an hour more than the existing workforce. And these workers had been there 10, 20, 30 years. These are long-term loyal workers to the company. But as a worker sees a new person coming in that they have to train, and this worker is getting $2 or $3 more an hour, they realize that that is extremely unfair. So workers also made petitions to the management, and with the support of Arise Chicago, actually gained significant wages, anywhere from 80 cents an hour to $3.20 an hour in the summer, fall of 2021. And we just recently heard that each worker has now received 36 cents an hour raise across the board as well.
C.J., one of the Arise sort of motto is faith, labor, action. What does Arise do to bring the perspective of faith to issues of worker justice in Chicagoland?
I'm so glad you asked that. Anyone who wants to visit our website, arisechicago.org, will see our history. And we're very proud of our history. We've been around 30 years. We were started by Bishop Jesse DeWitt of the United Methodist Church, Rabbi Robert Marks, and Monsignor Jack Egan of the Catholic Church. So again, kind of as I ran through the history, in the 1980s, you see the decline happening with workers. And these three faith leaders got together in 1991 and said, we have to have some sort of moral voice in response to what's happening to workers. And so they formed Arise Chicago. Engaging the faith community has been a part of our work from day one. We were founded by the faith community. I'm a faith leader, and it permeates all of our work. When I mentioned the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights being passed in Illinois, several clergy took trips with us down to Springfield and spoke to legislators. When we passed paid sick days in the city of Chicago or in Cook County, clergy and workers together would go and talk to the aldermen or the Cook County commissioners to say, we need this for the quality of our life. Faith leaders have played a very important role and surround workers with support, help workers see that there's a moral righteousness to what they're fighting for, and lift up the moral voice in our society. I believe the faith community needs to occupy more space in the public square and lift up these values, because our society is drowning in individualism and greed. And in my view, it's only the church and the synagogues and the mosques that are going to get into that public square and offer an alternative view.
CJ, we'd like to get to know a little bit more about you and your personal story. You know, you're a Methodist minister with obviously a social justice, labor relations bent. How did all that happen, either in your childhood or young adulthood? What brought you to this mission?
So I entered ministry in 1984 in an inner city church at the time, LaSalle Street Church, at Division and LaSalle, and 2 blocks away from Cabrini Green. This experience taught me so very much. But in my naive 20s, as I'm seeing the rates of homelessness rise, I'm seeing people being more hungry and not able to feed themselves. I thought to myself in the 1980s, my God, we could just build homeless shelters and food pantries till the cows come home. And this just seems to be endless. Then in 1993, I met the locked out Staley workers of Decatur, Illinois, who were locked out of their corn processing plant, about 760 workers. And it feels naive to say this, but that was the moment when I started piecing together the fact that it really is the workplace that makes a difference. As I said earlier, that dictates where we live, what kind of schools our kids are going to go to, the medical care. And so the workplace really became my focus beginning in 1993. When you look at the world through the lens of the workplace, through the lens of workers' experience, as Studs Terkel always encouraged us to do, you start to see the world in a little bit of a different way.
I have another question here, but first I want to just do a little greeting for those of you just joining us. This is the First Friday Club welcoming C.J. Hawking on the issue of workers in Chicago and what the faith community can do about it. I just want to say thank you all for staying connected to the First Friday Club during the pandemic, through your attendance and your financial support. For more information on how you can continue to support First Friday, please go to our website at firstfridayclubchicago.org. We welcome your support to help us keep bringing such thought-provoking speakers to you. CJ, could you tell us 2 or 3 of the best Arise stories of how workers came to you at Arise, and how you were able to bring the perspective of faith, Catholic social teaching, the social gospel, to bear on specific situations? I know often the presence of clergy, as you said, has been pivotal in resolving some of these situations.
Yeah. Thanks, Kathy. So there was a pizza place, one of those storefront pizza places, real close to Wrigley Field, that was not paying their workers properly. And it was a very abusive situation. And two of the workers left the job and did not get their final paycheck. They came to Arise Chicago, took our training, and we did an intake process with these two workers. When they came to us, they thought they were owed $700 and $800. We did our intake process. They were actually owed $35,000, these two workers. The owner had not been paying them proper minimum wage the entire time they were there, which was 2 and 3 years, I believe. And the owner never paid them overtime, $35,000. What we did is we typically do, we asked the faith community in the neighborhood to meet with the workers and hear their story, which they did. And then with the workers, those faith leaders joined us back at the pizza owner's place. We call them first, and I'd say 98% of the time our phone calls and our letters are ignored. So the workers themselves lead the delegation back to their previous employer, and they are the ones speaking. But it's the faith community standing behind them. And you can see the wheels turning in the owner's mind, like, oh, the faith leaders in my community now know that I have ripped these workers off. And, oh, I thought no one cared about these workers, but the faith leaders are showing me differently. Again, there's the moral voice, the moral certitude that having faith leaders and congregants provides in these situations. There was another situation recently in January of this year. A non-union construction worker from the Ukraine back in December of 2020 fell from a construction site, and he fell 4 stories into a dumpster. He died 2 weeks later. This was a non-union construction worker. On the 1-year anniversary of his death, about a dozen faith leaders came out to the site where this Ukrainian man, who we had never met, where this Ukrainian man died. We held a prayer vigil, clergy spoke, we had a violinist, other labor leaders spoke as well. And this is a moment where Arise can really heighten people's awareness about what is happening to workers. We believe that all construction jobs should be unionized because of their safety protocols. And this gentleman, 55 years old from Ukraine, did not have those safety protocols. The image of someone falling headfirst into a dumpster turns our stomachs. And it should turn the stomach of everybody in Chicagoland. We want to continue to raise the moral voice so that these kinds of accidents don't happen again.
See, Reverend C.J., we got a question from a young person who said that many of her friends have social justice leanings, but not necessarily in the area of work and labor relations. Labor hasn't caught on the way other social justice topics have caught on with younger people. Do you see that as a reality? And do you have any thoughts about why that might be, or what could be done to change that?
Well, I so appreciate the question, and I have great hope for people in their 20s and 30s because they have been raised in the economic recession of 2008. You know, some were coming out of college and had no jobs, and they're living in mom and dad's paneled basement, and they realize that that whole American dream is not really for them. And then we come into the pandemic. I mean, just a lot of things have happened related to the workplace to this generation. So I think they do have a heightened sensitivity. Every now and then, I think we should all just get out of the way and let the 30-somethings run the show. But that's a whole nother discussion, isn't it? So I understand that there are values of diversity and inclusion that young people bring, and that they need to speak that truth to all of us in the faith movement and in the labor movement. I am hopeful by them speaking up that we can continue to change and evolve. Faith leaders and union leaders want to be more responsive to people and want to fulfill their mission, but don't always know how. And so we're depending on young people to bring that voice forward.
Reverend C.J., a question here. Many people find themselves suspicious of worker grievances or of certain strikes that might be happening. How much of this is because they have, sometimes without even knowing it, been influenced by the strongest forces in American life, capitalism, the business community, who can spend a lot of money to tell the story in a way that creates skepticism about worker claims? I wonder if you think that's true, and if people could learn to hold that and listen to what actual workers are saying about their experience.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Again, I really do think there's a heightened awareness because of the pandemic. You know, I, as a white middle-class person sitting in the suburbs, had food, I was safe, I was comfortable. And I had to stop and think, how is that when other people, such as this young man who worked in Bedford Park, you know, have these devastating losses around them? Again, I think the pandemic really heightened a lot. I'm also aware I have paid sick days, and many middle-class professional workers have paid sick days, but we had to fight for paid sick days in the city of Chicago and in Cook County, both of which were passed also in 2016. But here's the catch. When workers finished out 2020, they could only carry over 2.5 paid sick days when they finished out 2021, still adjusting to the new year, they could only carry 2.5 sick days into 2022. And this is what we're seeing as we're recording. The Omicron variant is very prevalent. So workers might have 2.5 sick days, but if they were sick last year, they have none. And there is a harshness to a worker being sick and having to take off work and then not getting paid for that time. We do see a lot of employers demanding that workers, if they have mild COVID, still come into work. Well, that is spreading Omicron. But also these workers need to have their wages. They need to have more than 2.5 sick days going into the new year. I was a part of the group that negotiated that at City Hall, and it haunts me. It really haunts me in the pandemic. 2.5 sick days carryover is just not enough for anybody.
CJ, can I ask about all these signs you see practically everywhere today, hiring? And some of them, if you go down or drive down with your car a mile or so, you just see one is offering $15 starting and the other is $20,000 bonus. I mean, there's just all kinds of incentives to get people to come to work. Do you find that the employers are a little bit more gracious to workers? Because if you lose them, you've got nobody. That's number one. And secondly, based upon that, do you see workers saying at all, you know, we have the possibility of a new sense of strength, because right now they need us almost more than we need them, but we need the money, but they need the output. So is the workplace changing at all for those who are blue collar or no collar, from what you and your organization are able to see?
I appreciate the question. I think workers are really assessing the quality of their jobs and the quality of their lives. We are aware of some union contracts that have been reopened in order to increase workers' wages, in order to keep the workers on board. There's one union leader who told me that one employer reopened a contract and gave workers $5 more an hour. That's probably a wage they should have had to start with, but the pandemic is pushing that up, and we're excited to see that. So many workers do not have those supports in place. If we look to other industrialized countries, especially those in Europe, where childcare and maternity leave and healthcare and pension, all of these things are provided by the government or the high union density that European countries have. That's not the case in the United States. We have so many people, baby boomers, who won't be able to retire, who won't be able to, rest and put their feet up, and will have to work straight into old age because Social Security is not enough. So this has been a moment where workers are really assessing how they can gain more in the workplace, and Arise Chicago is certainly supporting them as well. It's also a time where employers are realizing if we say that the market will make adjustments, kind of Samuel Adams, if the market is going to make adjustments, this is a time to make an adjustment and to increase workers' wages in order to keep workers.
Good sign.
Yes. Yeah.
Reverend C.J., can you tell us, well, I'll just give you an example, because I've had some involvement with you folks at Arise. Someone along the way told me, if you're at a restaurant, which obviously with Omicron I'm not at today, but hopefully I'll be back too soon. If you're at a restaurant, tip the workers in cash. If you tip the workers in cash, there's no way for the employer to skimp on the tips later when he or she is doling them out. Are there other examples of things that our members, First Friday Club members who are out in the world, could be paying attention to and making small differences just by being more aware of what people in different workplaces that they might come across, anything they can be doing?
I appreciate that, Mike. And a lot of us don't carry cash anymore, right? But yes, if you're going to go out to a restaurant, make sure that you have cash. I would even add in, put it in the worker's hand if that's at all possible, because studies have been done anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of those tips that you're leaving on your credit card are stolen by the owner of the restaurant. So I think tipping workers is really good. Many of us in the pandemic have doubled our tips, including to the delivery people bringing us, meals or groceries. I think also people need to be aware that it's okay to tip a variety of workers. If you go through a car wash, tip those workers. If you stay in a hotel, here's what I do. On the morning that I'm leaving, I completely strip my bed and I leave money on the bed as a tip to the worker. A lot of people don't think about tipping hotel workers, but that is very crucial. As you know, hotel workers have been decimated, absolutely decimated. At one point, they had 98% unemployment rate in the pandemic. So we all need to support each other and realize that those of us who are fairly well off or at least comfortable need to support the bottom 50% of wage earners.
Are there certain workplaces that are the most prone to wage theft and other problems like that?
Restaurants often have problems. Now, I know the Illinois Restaurant Association director, Sam Toya, great guy. And there are very, very many restaurants who are credible and pay their workers fairly and don't steal tips. And those aren't the employers that we're talking about. We're talking about the restaurants where wages are stolen. Restaurants are big construction sites. Often workers will, do a rehab project and be on the project for a month or two, and the contractor will say, I'll pay you, and then they never get paid. We see that a lot. Factories also, retail stores, it's rampant. It's an epidemic in of itself. $1 million a day. And just one last thing to think about with that $1 million a day, imagine if we had that, then people would be paying taxes and employers would be paying taxes. Like if we're looking to raise the revenue in our city, county, or state, this is where we can find it. The money is being earned, taken out of the pockets of the people who need it the most and work the hardest to get it. But there's a whole tax revenue system that we are all at a disadvantage of because of wage theft.
Could you also just run down some of the most recent achievements that Arise has either proposed or supported that have been turned into law in the city and the county?
Oh my gosh, how kind. Oh my God. I get my bragging sheet out. So Arise Chicago has advocated many times in coalitions to pass 6 laws at the city, county, and state level. Probably the one that we're most proud of is in 2018, after a 3-year campaign, Arise Chicago led the charge to establish an Office of Labor Standards within the city of Chicago. It is housed in Business Affairs and Consumer Protection. It has an excellent director, Andy Fox, and this office has been charged with enforcement. Prior to that, nobody in the city of Chicago was actually enforcing minimum wage or paid sick days, or now the Fair Work Week that has also been passed. And so this office, workers can access it by dialing 311, or they can come to Arise Chicago and we will help with their campaigns as well. So the Office of Labor Standards was established after we examined, how did Seattle do this? How did San Francisco and New York City do this? And we took all the good things that they were doing and set that in motion in Chicago as well. And I applaud City Council for passing that ordinance.
CJ, I'm wondering, based upon Mike Cahill's last question to you, my mind just went, my mind exploded in a positive way with your reply regarding the workers in hotels. I had that experience last week. I had to preside at a funeral on the West Coast, and I was able to go face to face with the young lady who was cleaning my room, and therefore I was able to put money in her hand and to thank her very much. Is it possible for Arise Chicago, or maybe you would, to give the churches in the Chicago area suggestions like that on how we can be more supportive to the local workers? 2 of them have come up now. Number one, I just mentioned the one you suggested about the those who clean our rooms when we travel, and then the one prior to that about cash to the servers. And I would really, personally, I would really benefit from knowing more of those kind of moments of financial and personal support to the people who serve us, wait on us, work for us. I always try to take care of the people in a car wash because, that if you have a rainy day, they're not working.
That's right.
And so my sensitivity has been raised, and my moral conscience has been perked. I need more of that. And I need people who can do the thinking for me. And if Arise has some of those suggestions, and you can get them out to all the local churches and mosques and temples, I think we would all benefit. And I think we can extend the work you do.
That's great, Father John. Thank you. So I have two thoughts about that. The first is that Arise Chicago every Labor Day weekend does labor in the pulpit. And pre-pandemic, we were in 100 services every year for the past 12 years. And lifting up the sacred link between work and faith and sharing those ideas with folks. The second thing is just a little note about car washes. Arise Chicago and the University of Illinois Labor Education Program did a study of 81 car washes in the city of Chicago. This was about 10 years ago. 81 car washes. These aren't the ones that you just drive through. These are called luxury car washes where there are people working and they're going to dry your car, etc. 81 we surveyed, not one car wash, not one paid their workers properly. This is a rampant epidemic among low-wage workers having to endure this suffering. And we need to change this as a city, as a county, as people of faith. We need to call this out. It's so basic. Thou shalt not steal. It's so very basic. So I applaud you, Father John, for asking for a list. And perhaps we can make that available on our website in the coming months.
That you want to speak to that maybe our questions did not get to yet, that you were hoping, might come up, that you think would be important for our members to hear?
That's so kind. That's so kind. So it's really kind of dovetailing on what Father John was bringing up, that, Arise Chicago can help give direction on how to improve tips to workers and that sort of thing. But as we look at the civil rights movement or the women's movement or any other movements in our country, it's really grassroots people building that social movement and building changes in public policy. And so I invite all of you to go to Arise Chicago website, sign up for our newsletter, and help build that movement so that workers have a fuller measure of God's justice in the workplace. People of faith, our voices matter more than ever before. And I hope all of us will step up together and work together for the common good. Thank you, and God bless you all. It's been great to be with you.
Thank you, Reverend C.J. Hawking from Arise Chicago. Thanks for all you do for our city. Kathy, you got some closing remarks, and then we'll send it back to Father Cusick for a benediction.
Just one more reminder. Thanks again, Reverend CJ. That was wonderful. Just one more reminder. Thank you for staying connected to the First Friday Club during the pandemic through your attendance and your financial support. If you would, we ask you to please consider supporting the First Friday Club, which you can do at our website, firstfridayclubchicago.org.
Thank you. Thank you both. CJ, thank you so much. My mind is working overtime. I should say my imagination is working overtime right now. My mind has been dull for years, but
I got that.
Just a little reminder, next month, April 1st, we have a person whose name may not be familiar to you now, but I guarantee you, you knew this name a number of years ago. Her name is Annette Nance Holt, H-O-L-T. And she and her husband's only son was gunned down as he tried to protect a girl from his school as somebody walked in on a CTA bus and just shot him. It was a horrible thing. Annette Nance Holt is now the fire commissioner for the city of Chicago. She has been with the fire department in Chicago many, many years. And she has a rich life, some positive, some sad, that she will be able to share with us in her new capacity as the relatively new capacity as the fire commissioner of Chicago. That will take place on the first Friday of April, April 1st. And for this time together, gracious God, would you help raise in our consciousness those less fortunate than we? May we not just be observers, but may we be participants in the human community to bring love and generosity to all of those who we see, who serve us in so many different ways. May we be a participant in building a better world in your name. Amen.
Amen.
And
Peace, folks. Have a good month.